Well, I've done thousands of videos, covered thousands of people and topics, and also gotten billions of views in the process, but it's all come to this. Dan Schneider threatened to sue me. Dan Schneider was the man who thought this was okay, thought that this was okay, and he thought this was... Oh dear mother of God, he actually... Oh God. Yeah, this doesn't shock me anymore. But okay, he thought all of those things were okay, but one thing he didn't find okay was a couple weeks ago I made a video about the relationship with him and Ariana Grande and why they're still friends. Basically just bringing up some stories of a visible favoritism that happened on the set of Victorious and also Sam and Cat that favored Ariana Grande. Which is why she doesn't seem to be visibly close to her former co-star Jeanette McCurdy or support any of her claims against Dan Schneider or any other people she dealt with in Hollywood. Now, not only does Ariana Grande not talk to Jeanette McCurdy, but she's one of the only Nickelodeon stars that still talks to Dan Schneider, at least until the last couple of years before that documentary came out. And doing what I do as an entertainment, news, TikToker, and YouTuber, I do thousands of videos on celebrities, with probably the most notable example being the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, where I think I was the most viral guy with about 150 million views on that, but I've actually over the years only been reached out by 2 celebrities directly. And the first person to reach out to me was actually Mr. Beast, who saw I did a video on him, followed me, and then he DM'd me saying he's actually been watching my videos on and off for years, and it led to this really great phone call, and I actually was almost crying after he called me. It was like the biggest thing in the world to me. And, he's a really great guy. And, I told him, I was like, yeah, if I ever do a video on you again, I'm going to shoot a text message to you and, get a real dialogue before we do the story. And I love that relationship. And I love the fact that, he reached out to somebody who was in the media. And I think that's why he follows me, Noah Glenn Carter, and a few other creators who definitely do news. Then the second time somebody ever reached out to me was Dan Schneider, who did it a very different way, where his lawyers contacted me threatening to sue me over the video and all this other stuff. And also, just for the record, this is all I'm going to show regarding the email I received. There was an attachment, but I'm not going to put the law firm's information because I just don't want any lawyers publicly attacked. They're just his employees, and I don't want anything like that going on. But I did read through what the lawyers sent me, and they actually made 2 really good points that they were trying to get me to remove the video for, with the first one being that Dan Schneider was fired from Nickelodeon. That was because in the video I said Dan Schneider was fired from Nickelodeon, which actually is not true because technically Dan Schneider did resign, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And that's because when he did resign, it was during 2018, where the height of the Me Too era was going on, where people like Harvey Weinstein were getting taken down, and Dan Schneider did have a lot of claims against him, so it was definitely a resign and disgrace, even though Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider tried to play it off like it was nothing. And I will admit I was wrong to say he got fired. I should have just said he left Nickelodeon after scandals started to break out, but at the same time, these lawyers were trying to say, oh, he left Nickelodeon on good terms. Meanwhile, he had other contracts with them. There was clearly this error thing going on. There was a pushback on Dan Schneider, and that's almost like saying Richard Nixon resigned on good terms. That just didn't happen. But the next one was actually worse on my part because I made the claim that Jeanette McCurdy said that Dan Schneider got her drunk and began taking pictures of her in a bikini, which that story has definitely spread around online, and that turns out not to be completely true, but there are points to it that are. That's because that story was actually kind of combined into 2 separate incidents that Jen McCurdy mentioned, where she blamed it on someone called the Creator, who she never explicitly said, but come on, we all know it's Dan Schneider. With Jeanette McCurdy's first incident being something that happened to her at Nickelodeon, where a producer was telling her to wear a bikini, and that producer was very likely Dan Schneider, and she was suffering from anorexia at the time, and that producer just didn't care. And then the second incident she said was when the producer gave her alcohol at the age of 15, where that producer was very clearly Dan Schneider, so even though the bikini story and the drinking story aren't directly related, and the web kind of combined those 2, which is how I made my mistake, those are 2 really bad stories, and she's clearly blaming Dan. And let's just say hypothetically this creator isn't Dan Schneider, it's another producer that gave her alcohol, another producer that didn't care she had anorexia, all these other problems. Jeanette McCurdy still went to the press saying she was offered $300,000 by Nickelodeon not to talk about Dan Schneider or any issues there, so very clearly she did have other problems there that Dan Schneider's just ignoring. So after I got that email and read the document from Dan Schneider's legal team, some people were saying, oh, you should talk to a lawyer, some people were saying just delete the videos and apologize. And, I didn't want to talk to a lawyer because that's money and I don't really want to spend that. And I also just didn't want to apologize, even though I was happy to delete the video and then replace it. But instead, I actually wanted to have a little bit of fun with these lawyers because I know reality is they're not going to sue me. The reason is because if they did sue me, there would be this really expensive process and we'd have to bring out witnesses where, okay, now we're going to have to question Jeanette. We might have to question Ariana. And it would just be this big ordeal that no lawyer or no person really wants to go through, especially because even if I'm wrong, even if I was saying everything wrong and I deserve to be sued, all these other bad claims would come out about Dan Schneider, which are true. And the second thing is I actually kind of saw this as some sort of opportunity to maybe do some talking with Dan Schneider where I actually want to interview the guy. I want to speak to this person either in an interview over the phone because I really want to get a sense for the news, and this was the email I decided to send instead. Basically, I just tried to lay things out in my response right here where I said, hey, do a Zoom interview with me for 45 minutes. I'll delete the video. I even promised afterwards I wouldn't do a Dan Schneider video for like the next year. I said the interview will speak for itself. That's all I need. I won't cover Dan news. And then I was bringing up, hey, this is why I don't think a defamation lawsuit or whatever is practical right now. And this is why you don't want to do it. That's what I just began to write. So then I actually just explained why I thought the interview was a good idea, where I mentioned I've interviewed Mark Cuban in the past, Newt Gingrich, recently Mayor Eric Adams, and also some people in the celebrity world like Jaleel White or Don McClain. And I was just telling them, I was like, hey, I'm not going to be brutal. I'm not a mudslinger. I'll give him a fair chance. We'll do a friendly interview. And I'll just have him address these claims against him that are circulating the web, give his side of the story. And if people like that story, maybe the public has a better image of him. Then I just kind of pointed out the game where if I like Dan Schneider's story and think he's innocent, I would actually maybe do more positive content on him, and other people would as well. So basically I just gave my number and said, hey, give me a call. Let's work out something here. And I said, even if you don't want to do an interview, put me in a call with Dan Schneider, because maybe I can just give him some advice from a content creator standpoint on what issues he's not addressing with the public, what he's doing wrong, and maybe how to make himself more likable again so he can book future work like he really wants to do. And the thing is, at that point, they didn't really respond. I actually had to call up them 3 times. I sent 2 more emails with the same thing. And then finally, about a week later, they sent this response right here saying, oh, this is not a negotiation, which I expected they were going to send something like that. I was kind of just shooting in the dark. But then they don't really say what the threat is. They don't say they're going to actually take me to court. It's just this very weird thing at this point. And I just, at that point, responded back to them saying, I'll take the video down because I'm wrong. And I do admit that there were some mistakes there, but I'm just going to put it back up. I'm just going to put that video back up and retweak it to be right. And then I just pointed out, I sent them links, and I was like, oh, hey guys, here's other creators who are all over the place, like with Dan Schneider claims, some of them worse than mine. Maybe you guys should actually just, talk to me and start actually fixing this issue versus just threatening to sue people. Because you're going to just put yourself in a thing where this is never going to end. I mean, I brought up Patrick CC, has millions of views. I said I've had millions of views on claims that were correct on Dan Schneider, so maybe it's best that you guys just finally start talking to people versus suing them. And honestly, part of the reason why I sent the email where I wanted to do the phone call or wanted to do the interview is I actually do kind of hope that the claims made about this guy are not true. One dream of mine is, outside of YouTube, outside of TikTok, is to be a writer, director, producer. And as a kid, I actually looked up to this guy. I thought he was such a badass. Like he is still to this day in the top 5, top 10 best TV producers alive. And I was just saying, maybe we can clear it up. Maybe we can actually fix things. I don't know if it's an apology tour. I don't know if it's explaining things, because I don't think every rumor about this guy is true. I think there's some things which are absolutely awful about him. And then I think there are some things which are, it's hard to explain, but I think there's some things that are overstated. So I wanted to just get in the conversation here to actually make things a little bit better. And I told them that, and I said, hey, let's try to make a plan. But yeah, no response on any of that. And this is where we are right now, where we have good old Dan Schneider here. And I did actually send, and honestly, I think he should get a better legal team, to be frank with you, because I sent them numerous emails and they responded to one of them. Even when I said, oh, hey, I'm not going to put it down unless you respond, they didn't really do anything. He doesn't have the best legal team. And honestly, I think it's because they've probably sent out 20 or 30 of these to different creators over the years. I doubt I'm the only one. I think I'm the only one that just wanted to make a video on it. And I told Dan, Dan's legal guys, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do a video saying that I was sued. I said I will take down the video because I don't want to put out bad information. But, I think you guys have to work on this press thing, and they just don't respond. And honestly, I kind of feel bad for Dan Schneider, because I think the lawyers just want to keep on collecting money, suing people or threatening to sue people, but no one wants to fix the problem. So, his lawyers have my number. It's easy to find. They can contact me whenever. I'm actually going to send them a link to this video. But yeah, I'm Charles Peralta. Subscribe to learn something. And that was my first threat of a lawsuit. Took about 4,000 videos. But here we are. See ya.